Hi, I'm Gregg Oppenheimer. Welcome to Online Radio Theater. Tonight we're doing something a little different. Instead of recreating a single radio program, I've decided to showcase a number of shows that my dad wrote for when he first got to Hollywood in the 1930s. And just to clear up any possible confusion, the fellow you see talking as though he's Jess Oppenheimer isn't really my father. He's an actor just like all the other people in the show. Enjoy.
One of the most famous long-running gags in the history of radio was a feud between two comedy greats, Jack Benny and Fred Allen. On one occasion, Benny was talking about ad-libs when Allen interjected,
"Jack, you couldn't ad-lib a belch after a Hungarian dinner."
To which Benny responded,
"You wouldn't dare say that if my writers were here."
Why do I bring up this famous feud? Well, it's a little-known fact that at one time, Jess Oppenheimer, the creator of I Love Lucy, was on both sides of the Benny Allen feud, by which I mean that he was writing what each of them was saying about the other. This is the story of how that happened.
As a kid growing up in San Francisco, I spent every spare moment listening to the magical voices coming out of the radio, especially the comedians. At school, during the Depression, my classmates dreamed of getting a steady job. Not me. I dreamed of comedy. They paid attention in class. I scribbled jokes in my notebook. Maybe that's why I ended up working in a fur warehouse instead of graduating college. But when I turned 22, I decided to go after my dream. I typed up a comedy routine and mailed it to Burns and Allen in Hollywood, certain that they'd offer me a writing job as soon as they read it. I mean, why wouldn't they?
George, I just can't decide what to do today.
Gracie, you should be more definite.
I should be more definite.
That's what I said.
I have an uncle who's definite.
Why do you say your uncle is definite?
Well, he told me so.
How did your uncle happen to tell you that?
Well, I asked him if there was something wrong with his ear,
And he said he was definite.
Gee, how did you know?
The mailman soon delivered my answer, written on the elegant stationery of the Hollywood Plaza Hotel, located at the world-famous intersection of Hollywood and Vine.
Dear Mr. Oppenheimer, we wish to thank you for your interest in submitting your jokes to us. However, we are returning them herewith inasmuch as we have 2 writers under contract who write all our material, and therefore we are not in a position to accept any outside scripts, etc. Sincerely, Helen Shore, Secretary to Burns and Allen.
I was overjoyed. If not for their contractual obligations, clearly they'd have snapped me up right away. Now I was even more determined to follow my dream. I drove my 10-year-old yellow Packard convertible down the coast to Hollywood, secure in the belief I'd soon find fame and fortune. And as luck would have it, I soon landed a job at Packard's advertising agency, writing for their client's new radio show on the NBC Red Network, The Packard Hour, starring Fred Astaire. I was assigned the task of writing lead-ins. What's a lead-in, you ask? Good question. A lead-in is radio speak for whenever you introduce a song or a guest star. For example,
we will now hear Who Knows from Rosalie, played by Phil Harris, who knows from nothing.
Of course, not all lead-ins are one-liners. Take this one I once wrote for Al Jolson to use on his program.
Folks, I'm going to introduce a man to you now whose name has become a legend in the theater. His magnificent acting has thrilled us on the stage, screen, and radio. And it is a pleasure to have him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Barrymore.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Al. That was a most gracious introduction.
I hope you liked it, John.
I hope you meant it, Al.
Why, John, do you doubt for 1 minute that I meant all those nice things I said about you?
Oh, I know, Al.
Are you saying my voice suggested a lack of sincerity?
Don't get me wrong.
I mean, could you really tell?
Even if I thought you meant that, I could not say so. That is the price I must pay for my being here.
Ah, but John, how little that is.
Yes, it is little.
Compared to the price we must pay for your being here.
I went to work on the Packet Hour in October 1936. Audiences were flocking to theaters to see Fred Astaire's sixth hit movie with Ginger Rogers, and the highlight of each week's radio broadcast was Fred's big dance number. Dance. On the radio. Of course, millions of people also tuned in to listen to a ventriloquist on the radio. Edgar Bergen and his famous dummy, Charlie McCarthy, starred in the top-rated Chase and Sanborn Hour. Some critics at the time were puzzled by Edgar Bergen's success on the radio, but I'll say this for him. In all of the times I listened to Charlie McCarthy on that program, I never once saw Bergen's lips move. For the Packet Hour, Fred Astaire spent hours in the NBC studios each week on a 4-foot square wooden platform surrounded by microphones, rehearsing dance routines no one would ever see. Our director suggested saving time by having the drummer make the tap sounds with his drumsticks, but Fred would have none of it. The audience was tuning in to hear him dance, and that was what they were going to get. The first actual comedy sketch I wrote featured a now-forgotten comedian named Charles Butterworth. In my sketch, Charlie played the proprietor of a store selling nothing but doors. Door samples lined all the walls of the place. Charlie's character had been there for 10 years, trying to find his way out. The humor was definitely lowbrow, typical of the screwball comedies of that period.
What kind of door are you looking for, stranger?
I want an oak door.
Well, how about this model? Whispering hinges, we call it. Made of clear pine.
I said I wanted oak.
Sorry, wrong lumber.
The following June, Fred called it quits, putting an end to the Packet Hour and my job. But then fate intervened. One of Jack Benny's writers was a famous gag man named Al Boasberg, who'd written for films like A Night at the Opera. Boasberg had been supplying Jack with jokes since his vaudeville days and was now working for him just on weekends, punching up Morrow and Bouloigne's radio scripts. Over the summer, Boasberg passed away, and then I got a lucky break. Packard's ad agency also produced the Benny program, and someone there told Jack I was a promising young talent. They asked me to write a comedy routine. Jack liked what he saw, and just like that, I slid right into Al Boasberg's old job. With one slight adjustment. First, they took Boasberg's weekly salary and slid the decimal point over a couple of places. Watching Jack perform his show every Sunday was a wonder to behold. He'd deliver a laugh line, then lay his hand against his cheek and open his eyes wide, looking out at the studio audience, slowly turning his head like a comic lighthouse, and the longer he looked, the more they laughed. I have to say that writing for Jack Benny was almost effortless for me. All I had to do was show up at the studio, along with the cast on Saturday for the first table read, and say whatever popped into my head as they went through the script. No need to work out a premise or a story, just whatever funny line I happened to think of. It was the easiest writing job I ever had. On the other hand, working just one day a week wasn't going to pay the rent, so I signed on to a show called Hollywood Mardi Gras. Don Wilson was the announcer, and each week featured different big-name guest stars.
And now for tonight's guests here on Hollywood Mardi Gras, presenting George Burns and Gracie Allen.
Thank you. Well, it's certainly nice being here.
George.
Oh, hello, Don. Gracie, you remember Don Wilson, the announcer?
Don Wilson?
Don Wilson. He's one of the biggest announcers in radio.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Listen, Don Wilson happens to be a very fine radio personality. Not only that, as an announcer, he's way out in front.
I can see that, too.
You can, huh? Well, Don, say hello to Gracie anyway.
Hello, Gracie.
Hello, Don.
Of course, I know I'm a little stout, Gracie. Maybe I should exercise more.
Maybe you ought to get up early in the morning and walk around yourself 3 or 4 times.
Gracie, we're guests here on Hollywood Mardi Gras. And
I beg your pardon, but I'm Charlie Butterworth.
Oh, well, you don't have to apologize. Maybe it wasn't your fault.
apologize. Gracie, this is Charlie Butterworth. Charlie, don't mind Gracie. She doesn't even know what time it is.
Oh, that's all right, George. By the way, what time is it?
Well, this is going to be fine.
Oh, Mr. Butterworth, if I'm not too inquisitive, what do you do?
What does he do? Gracie, Charlie is one of the stars on this program. He's a comedian.
Yeah, but what does he do for a living?
What does he do for a living?
Yeah, whatever became of me?
I'll ask when he comes in.
If he's a comedian, ask him to tell me a joke.
But Gracie, this part of the script doesn't have any jokes for Charlie.
Yes, that's too bad. But, George, you do quite a bit of ad-libbing, don't you?
Yeah, but not tonight, Charlie.
Oh, why is that?
Oh, you see, it's hard for George to ad-lib without his glasses.
Thank you, Gracie.
You're welcome.
Well, goodbye, Gracie.
Goodbye, Charlie.
The feud between Fred Allen and Jack Benny had been going on for almost a year. So when Fred Allen and his wife, Portland Hoffa, came on Hollywood Mardi Gras, I suddenly found myself writing for both of the feuding parties.
Hello, Mr. Wilson. Hello, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, you don't need 2 hellos, do you, Portland? There's only one Mr. Wilson.
I know, but there's so much Mr. Wilson, you really need 2 hellos.
Oh, I'm sorry, Don. Portland, why don't you say something nice to him?
All right. Mr. Wilson, would you like a peanut?
Now, Portland, Don's no elephant.
Oh, Portland doesn't mean any harm, Fred. Everybody's been kidding me about my size lately. I'm on a program Sunday night with a fellow. You know who I mean.
I know. Jack Benny, the comedian.
Listen, Portland, I don't mind you mentioning names, but you don't have to go into details.
Has Jack Benny been making fun of your, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, Portland. Last Sunday night, he said I was a whale in sheep's clothing or something.
Oh, I heard that program, Don. I tuned in accidentally. I was trying to get some static.
I eventually left my one-day-a-week gig with Jack Benny to write the Gulf Screen Guild show, hosted by George Murphy. But the Benny Allen feud followed me there, too. On the very first show, Jack was a guest star along with Joan Crawford, and naturally, Fred Allen's name came up.
Joan, I can't tell you how happy I am that you're here. But before I say another word, I want you to meet Jack Benny. He's one of your greatest fans.
Fan? I'm practically a windmill.
Well, how do you do, Mr. Benny?
So glad to know you, Miss Crawford. And George is right. You know, I've always been a great admirer of yours.
Well, thank you, Jack. I call you Jack because I feel like I almost know you.
You do?
Oh, yes, I've heard Fred Allen speak of you so often.
You know, Allen has been saying a lot of things about me. But don't believe a word that comes out of his nose.
Well, Jack, I hate to take sides, but I listen to your program nearly every Sunday, and I've heard you say some pretty awful things.
About Allen?
No, just some pretty awful things.
So that's the story of how I landed on both sides of radio's most famous feud. But there's one thing that I skipped. The routine that helped me land the job on the Jack Benny program in the first place.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you a man
Pardon me, Don. You will, won't you?
Well, yes, of course, Jack, but I haven't introduced you yet.
Well, that's just what I wanted to ask you about, Don. Do you mind awfully if I just introduce myself tonight?
Why, not at all, Jack. Go ahead.
Thanks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the sweetest, the swellest, all-around good fellow it has ever been my privilege to work with, Jack Benny. Jello again, and thanks, Jack. Oh, skip it, kid, you deserved it. Well, thanks anyway. That's okay, you do the same for me. There, Don, do you see what I mean? A nice, good-natured introduction.
But, Jack, I could have said that just as well as you.
Yes, Don, you could. But I was sincere.
Well, Jack, you were also,
What is it, Don?
Well,
Go ahead, Don, say it. You know me. Just tell me the truth. I won't be angry. Give it to me straight from the shoulder. I promise I won't hold it against you.
Well, Jack, it sounded very egotistical.
You don't like it here, do you, Don?
Yes, I do, Jack. I love it here. And I don't think it's fair for you to take that attitude. After all, you asked me to give it to you straight from the shoulder.
Yes, Don, but I didn't expect a verbal right hook. Gee, Don, when you get vicious, you do it with a vengeance. Your tongue is so sharp, you can't even talk without splitting infinitives. You're absolutely cruel.
Well, Jack, I thought you wanted me to tell the truth.
I do, Don, I do. I want you to be George Washington.
You do?
Yes, but I didn't expect to be the cherry tree, if you know what I mean. Anyway, we'll drop the subject now, Don, but let me tell you. Oh, hello, Mary.
Hello, Jack. What's the matter? You look like someone just stepped on you.
They did, Mary. What you see on my face is the imprint of a heel.
Oh, Mary, Jack's just sore because he introduced himself tonight, and I said he sounded egotistical.
Well, Don, I think it was pretty thoughtless of you to say that to Jack.
Thanks, Mary.
Even if it is perfectly true.
Mary, Don, believe it or not, I can understand how you feel. But after all, everyone should be allowed an occasional burst of conceit, a justifiable session of self-appreciation, as it were. After all, I don't sound conceited all the time, do I, Mary?
No, you don't, Jack.
There, you see, Don?
You're not talking all the time.
Look, fellas, I thought this whole thing out very carefully. I'll admit there are two sides to the question, but I just can't understand how you can both be on the wrong side. Gosh, you'd think somebody around here would have some sense.
Yeah, wouldn't you?
Kenny, nobody asked you to comment. You don't even know what we're talking about.
Gosh, you'd think I'd have enough sense to stay out of it then.
Yes, Kenny, do you? Oh, hello, Phil.
Hiya, Jackson. What's new?
Look, Phil, and the rest of you keep quiet a minute. I'm going to put a question to you very bluntly.
Now, Jack, you know I can't afford another cut in salary.
No, Phil, that's not it. Look, don't you think I'm a nice fellow?
Why, sure.
And don't you think I'm well-rounded and not lacking in anything?
Other than hair.
Hair? Why, you know perfectly well I have just as much hair as it. Anyway, Phil, that's beside the point. The point being this. You don't think I'm conceited, do you?
No, Jack, I don't.
There, you see, fellas?
You certainly have no reason to be.
I might have known. Isn't there one soul who will be loyal, who loves me, and will stand up for me?
Have you got a dog?
No.
Will I do?
Kenny, you're my last chance. Now listen closely, Kenny, with both ears. Everybody around here thinks I'm conceited. Do you?
No, Jack. I think you're the most modest person I ever met.
There you are, fellas. See how loyal Kenny is, and who could blame him? Where could he find a more modest person? Where could he find a more humble soul? Where could he find a finer spirit?
Where could he find another job?
Quiet, Mary. Kenny, I have an apology to make to you. I've changed my opinion of your mental capacity. From now on, I'm going to tell everybody how smart you are.
You are?
Yes, I am.
Well, what's the catch?
There's no catch at all.
Well, thanks, but gee, you're going to sound awfully silly.
This has been Playing Both Sides, Jack Benny versus Fred Allen. The program was written by Gregg Oppenheimer, incorporating comedy routines written by his father, Jess Oppenheimer. Heard in the program were Larry Albert as Fred Allen, Alison Arngrim as Gracie Allen, Tommy Cook as Phil Harris, Ivan Cury as Jess Oppenheimer, David Ossman as John Barrymore and as the Door Store customer, Melinda Peterson as Portland Hoffa, Joan Crawford, and Burns and Allen's secretary, Miss Shore, Phil Proctor as Al Jolson, Charlie Butterworth, and George Murphy. Stuffy Singer as Kenny Baker, Beverly Washburn as Mary Livingston, and Brad Zinn as Jack Benny and George Burns. Tonight's program was produced and directed by Gregg Oppenheimer. And this is John Jensen speaking for Online Radio Theater. Good night.
How about this model? Whispering hinges, we call it. Made of clear pine.
I said I wanted oak.
Sorry, wrong lumber.
I stayed up all night for that.